There'll be different lighting, there'll be different forms of theatre. I think it may involve some degree of audience participation, it may not. It may have something of the elements of a lay, a secular religion, but I think it's going to develop, and I can see signs of it developing all over the world. Now, I don't think this is going to interfere with the development of the classic theatre. I think that Shakespeare, Ibsen, Neil Simon will still be produced. You laugh at Neil Simon. 80 years ago, they would have laughed at Ibsen. But I think that I think the classic theatre will continue because there will always be demand for it. Whether people will be writing for it, I don't know. They're not really writing for the classic opera house now. Not many people are writing for the orchestra with any conviction or power, not the symphony orchestra. Music is much more a matter of those machines. Machines have taken over like the birds. Anyway. But I think these two theatrical forms will coexist. At least they will coexist if we can provide the subsidy for our theatre, if we can provide enough money for our arts to survive. This is the most deplorable, awful thing, that we are the richest society the world has ever known. We are nowadays, I would say, probably the freest society. We're the freest society in as much as, although we are very much manipulated by the forces of business and advertising, we still have and have had since the downfall of McCarthy more or less a perfect right to speak our minds, and the attempt of a government to take that away from us was well and truly squashed. And we are the freest society, and we are by and large the richest society. I realise we have enormous inequalities in our society. We have a terrible problem of poverty. On the other hand, it's not, I don't think, quite the problem of poverty in other countries. It's certainly not quite the poverty that it was in this country, and we are. I'm very hopeful about the material position of this country, unless we succeed in blowing ourselves up, or we have a president who presses the wrong button by mistake. But I am appalled at the idea that we are very much a cultureless society. Martha Graham said recently of talking about the Greeks were talking about, a Greek poet was talking about a nation, and he said it was a nation that had no poets, and so it died. Now, we are a nation that has poets, but we are a nation that starves poets. We have the finest dance in the world. We have symphony orchestras that are second to none. We have a very fine and developing tradition of opera. Our theatre is by and large in splendid shape and better than it's been in years. And yet, we are in dire need of losing each and every one of those things. Very dire need. It is quite possible that we have already lost the New York State Opera. We nearly lost the Paul Taylor Dance Company a few months ago, and perhaps we have lost it because it has only had a stay of execution. All our arts institutions work by hand on mouth. The artists themselves have to either subsidise their own art. Our actors and our dancers are probably the worst paid in the world by and large. Or the artists themselves, the creative artists, have to go out and beg for money. They spend more money on fundraising than they do on art. This is deplorable. We give much less money to the arts per capita than any other civilized country. We give a lot more than we did. We have a very fine and very fair system of subsidy, which I think is the best in the world, because it happens on many tiers. We have municipal subsidy, we have state subsidy, we have federal subsidy, and then we have foundation subsidy, and even big business support. So it does mean it's not the monolithic kind of subsidy that one often finds in Europe, which means that if you are out with the artistic establishment, you can easily starve. We have so many artistic establishments that if the National Endowment on the Arts, for example, doesn't like what you're doing, you have the freedom to go to the Ford Foundation, or you have the freedom to try to get something from your own city or from your own state arts council. This is an excellent system. The trouble is we don't have enough money. We are trying to run the arts in this country on a pitifully small budget, which is absolutely ridiculous. The arts should be part of our educational system. It is totally ridiculous to build and develop a generation of children and students and young people, give them a good education, especially at the university level, in my opinion. Certainly not perhaps at the school level so much, but at the university level it's very good. It means that people have to stay there until they're 76 really to benefit from it, but still, if they stick around long enough, you can get a very good education. I expect my children to leave me at 18, and I don't expect I'll ever see them again, because I cannot see how they will ever emerge from the college system. I notice the children of my friends, they say goodbye to them, and and suddenly they don't see them again until they're 46, and when they're about to start work, and throw themselves dangerously on the labour market. Anyway, I do think that we ought to regard the arts as a form of education. It's useless to say, as Yahoos and Puritans used to say, those who want the arts can pay for the arts. This is ridiculous. A seat at the Metropolitan Opera that costs $30 has to be subsidised by another $40 or $50. And to ask anyone to pay $80 for a seat would mean that the Met would become the sole, if anyone would buy it, pay it, and I think some people might, it would become the sole preserve of the enormously wealthy, the very rich. Whereas the availability of the arts ought to be for all the people. You cannot push people into the arts, but you can make them available. You can't push people into education, but you can make it available. We see nothing funny in making our educational system relatively free. We should not see anything funny in making the arts relatively free. We must support them. And if people would only write to their legislators on every level, state, city, federal, and make their presence felt, make it known that they really do want the arts, then the legislators who always interpret letters in the words in the word VOTES would soon do something about it, and we would soon have a much healthier condition in this country. Well, that's all I've got to say in that way, but let's have questions and answers, and we can talk. Thank you. Anything you want to know, and could I have a glass of water? Yes.
Now, this foresee that the theatres, especially on Broadway, in the move to survive, moving to southern Westchester or Long Island, where you have a popular problem, or you have most of the theatre roads anyway, suburban beach. Foresee that they're moving on.
It could happen, I suppose. It hasn't happened yet, because for two reasons, I think. Firstly, people like to move from, people seem to like to go to the theatre. They seem to enjoy it. They don't seem, if they live in Westchester, they don't seem to want to have the theatre in Westchester. They actually seem to want to come into town. That's the first thing. The second thing is, although a lot of the theatre goers do live in the suburbs, it's difficult to provide suitable focuses for them. Manhattan still provides a focus, and I think that, in my opinion, so far there hasn't been a move. I mean, there've been the dinner theatres, but that's we're talking of art, not indigestion, and I think that this is something which I don't, so far hasn't happened. I thought it could, but it hasn't. No, it doesn't. Stratford, Connecticut is simply a summer festival. It opens for the school children at about fairly long season nowadays, but opens at in about May and runs through, I think, to October. But it's only a summer festival. I don't think it's even heated for winter activity. Yeah.
How many plays does the New York Drama Critic see?
I don't know. I suppose I go to the theatre usually about between 9 and 10 times a week. And I suppose of that, probably 4 would be theatre and 5 would be dance. I should think that would be about the balance. So, but it keeps me off the streets. Yes.
In a review, would you mention if there was technical difficulties in the play?
In a review, would I mention if there were technical difficulties in the play? One's always reminded of Dorothy Parker's remark on technical difficulties. I saw this play at a disadvantage. The curtain was up. But no, I don't. I think I would. Yes, I mean, it would depend on whether the technical difficulties were so gross that they offended. Yes, I think I would, but one wouldn't put too much emphasis on it, I think.
The reason why I asked that is because I've gone to a number of plays on Broadway, and they've been praised by critics. Yet I had a great deal of difficulty hearing the actors.
Well, they might have been in better shape on the first night. That's the first thing. The second thing is that one of the difficulties of critics is that we always sit in very good seats. I did a piece for the Times recently where I deliberately tried to get the worst seats in the house. And for the Wiz, for example, I stood in line and got myself a standing seat. The management instantly saw me and tried to grab me away and say, "Here, we can get you a seat." I said, "I don't want a seat. I want to sit there. I want to stand." And I saw Henry V from the back row of the in Central Park, right at the back. I thought it was just as bad back there as it was down there. And I saw another play, but it is one of the difficulties. Also, I do believe that plays do get sloppy, not only technically, but I remember when I was. Excuse me. I remember when I was taking over. I was a dance critic. Because I was a dance critic for 2 years before I did the double job, and I was appointed in the March, and I was taking over in the September, and consequently I went to see a lot of rather schlocky plays that perhaps I wouldn't have gone to see had I not been taking over the job, if you see what I mean. They weren't all bright, and a lot of them had been running literally for years at that time. And I remember going to see Barefoot in the Park, which I think had been running around barefoot for about 5 years by this time. And there were some things there. For example, there was a piece of business with a door, and no one quite knew what the business was. I mean, it must have been a very funny Mike Nichols shtick when it was new, but it had been passed down by stage manager to, by this time it was about the 28th cast. And no one, by this time, you know how you play that game and you pass a word round a circle, and well, by this time, no one knew what they were quite doing with that door. But 3 years ago, it got a hell of a laugh. And, and it was a business that had been, and that's one of the difficulties of long runs. It's like that wonderful Caruso story when in Bohème, a young tenor was singing Bohème at the Met, and he was told at a certain point in one of the arias, I forget which, at a certain point in one of the arias, to go into the corner and stand with his back to the audience for a minute or so, and then come back and finish the aria. There was a musical pause, and he was to head his back to the audience. Well, the young tenor couldn't see any sense in this at all. I mean, why suddenly walk over into the corner? And he was told, well, Caruso always did that. So he went and did it. Well, a year or so later, he actually met Caruso, and he said, "Excuse me, maestro, or signore, or whatever a young tenor would call Caruso." He said, I was singing Bohème, and I was told to stand with my back to the audience. I was told the reason for this was that you did it. And the great tenor agreed. Yes, I did do that, and I always do. I find it very convenient to spit at that moment. This is the way that certain kind of plays are handed down, and this is technically a great problem. I agree. can be very disappointing. We do try to get back to plays nowadays and to try to do a little kind of product testing on them. But even then, Equity insists that we give them notice. So instantly they get this notice and the play goes into rapid rehearsal. But even that, I suppose, does some good, at least for a few weeks. Uh-huh.
I have a two-part question. Because you're a drama critic, vis-a-vis a movie critic, don't you feel that you have more power? Like this afternoon, I read the review of Marathon Man in New Yorker magazine, and the man said this is the worst film Arthur Schlesinger ever produced. Okay, fine, the film's already out, I'm sure it's going to be a big box office success. But don't you think that you have the power, given like play releasing that night, write your review for the Times, and the next day the play can be canceled?
Yes, well, in the first place, do you want me to speak to that and then...
Well, the other half of my question is, because you have so much power, especially being with the Times, how do you feel about when you cancel plays? We have all these unemployed actors.
Well, I don't exactly cancel plays. I don't take plays off. I don't censor them. I do nothing but offer an opinion on them. If a play ends in one night, I can assure you that that play had got what is called a closing notice the week before. So that play had in fact closed before the critics saw it, because a play cannot close in one night unless the cast has been given written notice by the management the week before. So you see, a play that closes in one night is a play that the producer did not have very great faith in. He was merely praying to God that the critics would all come in some crazy mood of euphoria or possibly drunk, and suddenly, like lemmings, they would see this faded, awful little play, and they would jump up in their seats and say, "Good heavens, the advent of a major new talent." Unfortunately, that doesn't happen because they may come in drunk, but they don't come in a mood of even the mildest euphoria. And they are, you know. No, I once asked David Merrick on television, on live television, so he couldn't sneak out of it, if he could tell me the name of any good play that had been killed by the critics. He thought, he pulled his moustache a bit, he scowled a bit and said no. He couldn't think of a good play that had been killed by the critics. I told him a couple, but being a compassionate man, Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party in England and Jules Feiffer's Little Murders in New York. But both of those plays came back to recover. They were both given bad productions in the first instance, apart from anything else, and they recovered. They went on in other productions and they succeeded. Now, you've got to remember, when we are talking about this awesome power of the critics, remember that of the musicals, the hit musicals in New York at the moment, the longest running is Grease. The others are musicals such as Shenandoah, The Wiz, Chorus Line, Pippin, and what's the other masterpiece? Godspell. Now, apart from, and The Magic Show. Now, all of those musicals, they've all run, and Chicago, they've all run more than a season. They are all fairly substantial hits, and apart from A Chorus Line, I didn't happen to like any of them. Now, that hardly shows awesome power. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin. Edward Albee's last two plays, All Over and Seascape. I happen to admire both of them enormously. I wrote great rave notices of both of them. But the Broadway public did not want to know about a play about a man dying, nor did it want to know a play about a middle-aged couple lost on a beach and encountering two sea monsters who could talk English. And Broadway wasn't ready for that kind of thing. And All Over was all over in about 8 days. Seascape kind of kept rolling for about 4 or 5 weeks. You see, and these are not, I can give other examples as well. Tennessee Williams' last new play to be produced on Broadway, Outcry, I liked a lot. Quite a lot of other critics did, but it didn't do the play any good, it died. Okay, why did the myth of the awe-inspiring and the awesome power of the critics arise? I'll tell you why it arrives. Most of these plays that die are plays where you feel like sending the producer a telegram of congratulations when he gets the curtain up on the second act. You have never seen these kind of plays, because unless you go to first nights or occasionally previews, these plays no one ever gets to see. You can't imagine what these plays are like. They are unbelievably terrible. You suddenly, the curtain will go up, and you suddenly realise that you are going to spend the next 2 hours of your life with someone who has the mind of a cretin. And the egoism of a rather unpleasant child, and just because he has spent half of his fortune, 8 years of his life, and wrecked his family over the creation of this mini masterpiece, doesn't give him the right to bore people for 2 hours. But the simple fact is that these plays, the producer of these plays, these garbage plays, and they really are garbage plays, the producer of these plays has had, if a producer can't get a good play, a producer doesn't put his own money in a play, not unless he's a very stupid man. He puts other people's money in plays, and he gets a fee. He is paid a producer's fee, often a fat fee. He runs his office expenses, and sometimes those expenses are absolutely fascinating. And he makes quite a lot of money out of a bad play. A play that only runs one night, produced by a professional producer, will possibly lose anything up to $300,000. But that producer will probably have made something like $100,000. Now, if the producer cannot produce a good play, and they're honest men, they would prefer to produce a good play, he has to produce a bad play. Now, he hopes that the bad play will somehow be overnight transmogrified, is what is known as fixed, into a good play. It never is fixed into a good play. It was garbage to begin with, and it is garbage on the first night. It fails. Now, the producer cannot say to these people who he's taken the money from, look, I goofed, it was pretty rough when I started and it just got worse. No. All he'll say is, look, it wasn't a good play. Well, I knew it wasn't a great play. I'm not saying that this was not your Julius Caesar or your Macbeth or your whatever. It wasn't that kind of a play. I tell you what it was. It was a good audience play. And if only those critics had loved it, we would have had a line round that building. So you see, this is why the critics get blamed, because the producers can't accept the blame themselves, and the critics are perfectly good whipping boys. And when you see a bad notice of a play, there is a tendency to think, well, it can't be that bad. It could. And it was. Yes. Yes.
Mr. Barnes, what is your working procedure after you see a play on opening night?
Pardon?
What is your working procedure after you see a play?
Attitude of prayer, hope. I usually, if it's a Broadway, I get a taxi, or if it's a Broadway play, I walk to my office. I sit down and start typing, and 3/4 of an hour or an hour later, I have finished. And as I finish pages, they take them away and they set them up in print, and that's it. That is what I do on the night. Now, I will have done other things before. I will probably have read the play if I'm allowed to, if they will give me a copy. If it's a classic, I will certainly read the play. When I say read the play, I don't mean that I go through it with a fine tooth comb. I don't, because that would confuse me, and I read it rather as you might very quickly look at an ordnance survey map before making a trek, or I like to know that Hamlet dies in the last act, that kind of thing. But I don't want to know that, I just rush through it. But I don't want to have my own ideas on what the play should be like before I see it. If there's any background material, if it's say on a play about the Civil War, I will read. I'll do something on Sherman's. If I know it's about Sherman, I'll read something about Sherman's campaigns or something like that. Or I remember a couple of seasons ago we had a play in London that was supposed to be about the War of the Spanish Succession. and the Habsburgs. Well, as it turned out, it wasn't, but I had a very pleasant day reading about the Wars of Strange Succession, which I'd rather have forgotten about. I think I enjoyed it more than the play. And I do that kind of research. If it's based on a novel, I'll read the novel if I can. If it's based on a film, lots of musicals seem to be based on films these days, I'll try and get a run-through of the film, if someone will give me one. And that kind of thing, you know. As for, sometimes I see a preview. I quite like seeing previews because then you see them with audiences. The first night is not an audience. The first night is a puppet audience filled with, you know, friends of the actors and the cast and the backers and even friends of the producers if he has any friends. You know, it's an audience that has already seen the play and is watching the critics. I mean, they just watch you to see if you. I never emote. I used to laugh. I used to cry. I used to do all sorts of things. But now I play it like a cigar store wooden Indian. My face is impassive, and I don't know, because otherwise. But people keep on looking at you, and they very often, the press agent will put a big laugh for a comedy. They'll put a big laugher next to you, so you'll have this man kind of roaring around in helpless paroxysms of mirth, and keeping on looking at you and your wife and seeing, well, are they enjoying it? I mean, what the hell? And sometimes they'll laugh at the wrong places, and sometimes, you know, and also a terribly, you know, weak joke, you know. So anyway, no, that's the first night routine. It's yes.
There seem to be less serious plays on Broadway than musicals, and they seem to last a shorter period of time. Has this always been the case, or is this something new? And does that say anything about drama? And
I think it's always been the case. In as much as the so-called serious plays weren't very good. I mean, they were only serious plays in the sense that they were kind of melodramatic. They were, you know, that kind of play has moved to television, and the really serious plays now being done in the institutional theatre and that kind of thing. The only serious plays that are done, plays such as Travesties or Harold Pinter's No Man's Land or something like that, or for that matter, the Texas Trilogy, which opened the season. These plays have all originated elsewhere. They've all originated either in the resident theatre. The Texas Trilogy, for example, came from Dallas, the theatre in Dallas, and No Man's Land came from the National Theatre in London. And these are the only plays. It's very rare. The only playwright I think now who actually opens on Broadway with a serious play is Edward Albee, and I doubt whether he's going to be able to continue very much longer. I think he'll have to go and do his plays with the resident theatre across the country or in England before coming into town. It's the new thing. The last Tennessee Williams play was done in Vienna before New York, before coming in. It's a way of getting everything settled, and also a way of letting backers see the play, you see, so they can put money up.
Are there any new playwrights
Oh, yes.
that are going to last on Broadway or off Broadway?
Well, I don't know whether, you know, how long do they last, you know. I mean, people at the time thought Salieri was a better composer than Mozart, so what would we know? But I would say that there are a lot of new playwrights now. I mean, for example, Sam Shepard strikes me as one of the most interesting of the new playwrights. I'm interested in David Rabe, who's written Streamers and Sticks and Bones, and a number of other interesting plays. I'm interested in a lot of the playwrights around Joe Papp. There are beginning to be some women's playwrights. There's a whole mass of very interesting black playwrights. Now, I think we're very well off for playwrights at the moment. Some very interesting ones, and the opportunities for playwrights have never been better, I think, because there are so many theatres across the country that are looking for new plays. There are so many institutions in New York, for example, that are almost entirely devoted to the production of new plays, which is a very healthy situation. People are responding because there are opportunities of seeing their work done. It's good. Yeah.
Are there any critics who've written in the past who you used as models or you've admired very much?
I think the critics who I have admired most in the recent past have been, I admired Shaw very much, and Beerbohm. I thought they were both extraordinary critics. Hanecker can be read with interest, the American critic who was about their contemporary. I think that in more recent times, I think the critic I have admired most is actually my contemporary, Kenneth Tynan. I also admire Kerr, my colleague on the, Walter Kerr, my colleague on the New York Times, who I think writes better than almost any other critic. He's a very, very gifted writer, marvelous writer. I think they're the ones that I admire. I don't know whether I consciously took any of them as a model. I think my model is kind of a very common English model, which is, you might say, a touch of Mandarin patriotism combined with a sort of Ross New Yorker style and Mencken. I think, no, I'm serious. I think that that's a very common English style. It's the standard critical style in England. It's merely here that it seems a bit peculiar. But it's that was the way Tynan wrote it. My generation was extraordinarily influenced by American writing of that type, of the early New Yorker and Mencken, Nathan to an extent. We were very, very much influenced by that. And curiously enough, the American critics for a time went away from that style. They seemed to, I don't know why, but they seemed to become rather more, a little bit more pompous, a little bit more as though they were handing down tablets rather than offering a subjective opinion. And there is, I think, a tendency for American critics to take themselves too seriously. I was determined that when I took the job, one of the first things I would do would be to display my feet of clay and my cloven hoofs at every possible thing, and to make a fool of myself in public, even if it meant standing on top of my typewriter to do it, because I feel it was essential. I was the first Times critic to use that magic word "I." Before that, it had always been "in our opinion" or "in this column's opinion," or I once wanted to say "in this typewriter's opinion." I used the word "I." I don't know whether this is interesting, but why not? I used the word "I" for the first time in a bally notice, actually, because I noticed that the word "I" was verboten in the Times. And I was allowed to use "we," I noticed. I could say "we, in our opinion, we felt," which is all right. They never touch me or change me. And I expected to have an angry managing editor on the phone. I hung around waiting. Nothing. I thought, well, no one reads this stuff anyway. It's like John Dos Passos and dropping rose petals down the Grand Canyon. So I decided, well, hung for a sheep, for no lamb. So the next notice I wrote, I used "I." In those days, we used to correct our proofs ourselves. Now I've given it up. It's too painful because they don't make the corrections anyway, so to hell with them. But in those days, we used to go up to the print room, and I went up, and I saw that it had been set up as "I," and I passed it through, and then I went home, and I sat by my telephone, expecting someone to call. No one called. So the next morning, I got up early. I rushed down to get my paper, and I looked in. There it was, "I." It looked to me as if it were it was in red, and everything else was in black, but there it was, "I." I think I used it twice just to show that it wasn't a mistake. And nothing was said. Nothing. I wasn't fired. I wasn't. So from then on, I started to use "I." And slowly other critics started to use "I," and it seemed that we were allowed to use "I." But some years later, I was telling the man who was then the managing editor about that. I was always surprised that no one made any effort of it. He said, "Well, I'll tell you, we were thinking about this question of "I," and then we had an enormous number of phone discussions at night when your copy came through. And they said, well, we decided that, well, you were always rather a buffoon, and that if anyone was going to say "I," this crazy Englishman might as well say it as anyone else. So they just passed it through without comment. So, but my purpose was not was the very opposite of egoism. My purpose was to try to take away from the mystery of the times, to try to evoke a much more chatty and more human image of the Times critic, because it struck me as very important that was done. Yes. Any more questions? You want me to ask a question? Yes, yes.
I am curious. I've just read your review of the London scene,
Oh, yes.
and a lot of us think that's where the action's at. Is that true?
No, it's been a very bad season this year. No, I don't think it is. I think the National Theatre, which is coming in for a terrific amount of criticism, is going to be marvellous. I haven't seen it work, but it looks really wonderful. I'm very excited by it. Can't wait to get to see it in action. But no, it's been a bad season. I don't think the action is there. You know, people go to London and they see all these plays, but when you ask them, you discover that all they've been doing is they've been commuting between those major repertory companies, the Royal Shakespeare and the National, and possibly the Royal Court, all highly subsidised theatres. And they've been running between those theatres. But the actual West End theatre is in worse shape than we are. And there is no better shape than we are. And there is a lot of, I don't think that the London theatre is necessarily so much better than our own. It's better subsidised. I envy it for that. I envy all those wonderful sets. I envy. And also, there is another thing. I think that at times the acting can be better. And the reason for that is that our actors have to make a terrible choice at one stage in their career. They have to decide whether to stay in New York and this is almost the equivalent of staying in New York, or go out of New York into the resident theatre, or alternatively they can go to Los Angeles and start eating. Now, this is, I mean, I don't like Los Angeles. To me, it looks like a street in dire search of a town. And also all that orange juice makes me come out in bumps. But especially if I neglect to put vodka in it. But it's also healthy. But you do make money there, and I think that this is the great problem. That if you see in London, the films and the television are all done in one place. So in fact, they are almost amateur actors you see there. They're professional television stars and amateur actors. They are prepared to play for what we would call scale, because they make their money in movies and television. And this, I think, is a very serious problem for the American theatre. We don't have that. If we could raise White Plains to the ground and put Hollywood there, we would be. You see, it was all a mistake in the first place. Hollywood should never have been in Hollywood. It was just because the weather was better, and in those days the studios were out of doors. They haven't been out of doors for years. I mean, it was all a ghastly mistake. As soon as they really got proper cameras, they should have come back to civilization. Yes.
When a critic writes something, one thing they always do, or often do, is they'll take one minute, one short phrase out of what he wrote and say, Hyde Park, the New York Times said such and such about our play.
Yes, this practice of the short quote. I mean, this was the most deplorable evening in the theatre I've sat through since Shakespeare. Although I must say the lighting of the second act was brilliant. Brilliant, Clive Barnes, New York Times. Yes, I do want, but I don't think those little squibs have any great. I don't think anyone pays them any attention. I don't think they have a very great credibility quotient. I think that they're pretty much regarded as nonsense. There's nothing you can do about it. We once had a woman from the head of the commissioner in New York for Consumer Affairs, and she took legal opinion on whether they could be stopped from doing this as fairness in advertising sort of thing. And apparently it turned out they couldn't be. They weren't breaking any law as long as the words had been said, and as long as they were prepared to put a few dots around them. There was nothing there was no law on earth that could stop them. But I don't think that they're very. I think that the quotes probably are one of the reasons why critics become the monsters that producers say they are, because they're so, you know, after your name is publicised as if it were a detergent, people have heard of it. Now in London they're much smarter. They never name a critic. Never. They just say the paper. They never say the name. So that then it doesn't matter. As long as the paper reviews it, it doesn't matter. But if I don't review a Broadway play, if I send to my number 2 critic, all hell breaks out because they say that we're not taking it seriously or something like that, merely because they have publicised these particular names, which I think is probably foolish. I don't think they're credible.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor.
Okay, thank you very much.